Hello again. In this video, we're going to be looking at Earth History Investigation 3, Grand Canyon Rocks, and we finally get to some content. Students will be looking at rocks finally from the Grand Canyon area, and over the course of 1 week, they'll start to notice some patterns and start being able to answer some of the questions that they had from Investigation 2. For this video, I'm going to be focusing only on parts 1 and 2 of Investigation 3, because I feel like these are some of the trickier parts of the kit at this point in time. Students will be given a set of rocks, and you'll be telling them that they are from the Grand Canyon. Just a little legal disclaimer, these are not rocks from the Grand Canyon. They're from the Grand Canyon area. It is actually illegal to take rocks from the Grand Canyon as it is a national park. However, for the purposes of telling the story and getting the students interested, I usually just go ahead and tell them it's from these two locations in the Grand Canyon. But if it does come up and students ask about it, you can feel free to be honest about it. Just a little note, you're going to be giving the rocks from what are supposedly North Canyon and Nankook Canyon, which are about 32 miles apart in the main part of the Grand Canyon. It does take some time to set these boxes up. These are photos of the actual boxes. This is from the kit showing you where the different rocks go. If you remember from the previous video, the rocks are labeled with tiny numbers, and it does take some time to set these up. In addition, you will be setting up some bottles of dilute hydrochloric acid as described in the teacher guide, and ideally you will need some eye protection for that. However, if you don't have eye protection and your school doesn't require it, it is fairly dilute, weak acid, and really shouldn't be too much of an issue. If it did get into a student's on their skin, they won't even notice it. And so I go through a whole safety regime where I tell students, if it gets in your skin, don't panic. All you need is a little bit of water to rinse it off, and no harm done. Same thing if it does get into their eye, it feels kind of like getting lemon juice or vinegar in their eye, and you want to talk about the safety issues around that. The teacher guide will talk about how the students will observe these rocks. Again, you're not telling them any information about these rocks. All they know right now is the rocks and their numbers. They're going to be making observations about their textures. They're going to be trying to see if they react to the drop of hydrochloric acid that I mentioned earlier. And the goal is to get students to discover, eventually they'll discover that there are actually 3 types of rocks that they see here: sandstone, shale, and limestone. Again, you're not going to give them those names at the beginning, but eventually that's what you're working towards. Students will then take this information and be recording it on these sheets right here. Now, this is what I want to spend the bulk of the time talking about, because this part can get a little tricky, I found, with some of the students. So students are going to be taking these sheets, and let me switch to another presentation to show you what I'm talking about. This is something that I made for my class. I just took the transparencies that were provided on the FOSS kit, and I made PowerPoint slides of them, and I animated them because this part gets a little tricky. Students, once they realize that there are 3 types of rocks, they're going to be putting in the rock numbers as shown here, and then they're going to be writing in the names of the types of rocks. So this is where you're going to need to be careful about your terminology and your wording. There are 3 types of rocks. They haven't yet learned that these are sedimentary rocks, but that's what these are. And once they put in the type of rock that exists for each of these, and if you notice there's intentionally space left up above, you will then finally provide them with the correct name of this. So for example, there are multiple limestones, so you would have Torweep limestone, Kaibab limestone, Muav limestone, and so on. And that is to help students to, those are the actual names of the different layers of rock that they saw in the Grand Canyon and that they were actually holding in their hands. At this point, students are presented with a puzzle. Some students will notice right away, well, why is Hermit Shale all the way up here above the river, yet it's pretty close to the river over at North Canyon? Okay. Oh, by the way, this is an error. This should say mile 20, and this is correct. This is mile 52. So at some point, you want to help lead these students in either group discussions or in a whole class discussion that hopefully they will discover that what's going on here is not that the Hermit Shale is at different heights above the river, that if they look at the bottom and they see elevation of the river here and elevation of the river here, hopefully someone will notice, or you might have to guide them to that the river is actually changing elevation. At North Canyon, the river is 125 feet higher in elevation than Nankook Canyon. Now, a little side note. In my experience, some students will understand the concept of elevation fairly quickly. They understand that it's the height in feet above sea level. However, some students will confuse this and think that the Colorado River at this location is 2,800 feet deep. So you will need to kind of assess that and address it fairly early on. So once the students see that it's the river that's at different elevations, they then go through this whole activity where they take their sheets and they cut them out on the dotted lines, and they're actually going to physically move the sheets to two different heights like this in their notebooks. Now they'll be able to see that, oh, Hermit Shale is actually not changing. It was all along the Colorado River that was changing elevation. They can then connect these rock layers like this, where I tell them to connect the four that are common on both locations, North Canyon and Nankook Canyon. They'll just draw horizontal lines connecting the four. And then we have this whole discussion where students are not sure what to do next. At some point, when I ask them, well, what other features at both locations, and they realize it's the river that's at both locations, they can connect the Colorado River. And then this part does become tricky for some students. Some students will want to draw a diagonal line from the left to the right up here, but hopefully most students will recognize that there's a pattern going on and they will draw the line horizontal. And this is supposed to model the horizontal layers of rock that they saw in all the photographs in the map. You then show the students that each type of rock has its own key, own symbol, and this might take some time to walk through in terms of limestone. Some students will recognize pretty early on this looks like bricks. Sandstone, pretty clear, looks like sand or dots. And shale is a series of dashed lines. And students will then take that and they will generate something that looks like this. Now, this was generated on my computer, so it's a lot finer detail than what you would expect students to draw. But that just gives you a sense of what it should look like. So again, just to reiterate, it's very important that you let the students do the work and you introduce the vocabulary later in the investigation so that they can have a chance to construct their own understandings. And as you've seen here, I've really tried to use the transparencies that FOSS provides, the transparency PDFs, and use them to create my own PowerPoint slides so that they can have a better chance of seeing what's going on. Okay, just to end with, that pretty much ends it with investigation 3. As I mentioned, there are 2 other parts, and they go into the Colorado Plateau and some other information, but I really wanted to show you how to avoid some of the trickier parts of investigation 3. Have fun.